You're in chains. Not as a metaphor, real iron, heavy enough that your wrists have been raw for 6 days.
You used to be a warrior, a Gallic soldier with a name your mother gave you, a village, people who knew your face. That life ended on a battlefield 3 weeks ago when a Roman cavalry unit overran your position and a decurion knocked you unconscious with the flat of his sword. He kept you alive because you were worth something. 15 gold coins, as it turns out. That's what a man named Gaius paid for you this morning at the slave market beside the Tiber. He didn't negotiate. He barely looked at you, just checked your teeth, squeezed your forearms, and counted the coins. His name is Gaius Pompeius Musicus. His title is Lanista, owner and operator of the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiatorial school in the history of the world. You can hear the Colosseum from here.
Here's what they don't put in the movies. The gladiatorial system wasn't a death sentence for Rome's most dangerous criminals. By the time you're entering these gates, nearly half the men inside came here voluntarily. Free citizens who signed the Octoramentum surrendered their legal rights and traded their Roman citizenship for a shot at fame, money, and the only career in the empire where a nobody could die a legend. The Roman government paid Gaius's school directly. Politicians bid on his fighters for their arena games like they were bidding on racehorses. You're rank 1. Tirones, Latin for raw recruit. Same word the Roman army used for conscripts who hadn't earned the right to hold a real sword yet. Your first job isn't fighting. It's this. The training sand gets cleaned before your betters practice on it. That's the rule. That's everyone's rule when they first arrive. The 12 men ahead of you, the ones whose bodies look like they were carved from compressed stone, they know this because they've been here 3 months longer than you. Doctore walks the perimeter and says nothing. He doesn't need to. But here's what none of the documentaries show you about what happens next, because the thing keeping you alive in this building isn't the weapon, it's the food. And what they're feeding you will completely change how you understand everything that happens in that arena. You're staring at a bowl of barley and fava beans. Again. In Rome, they have a nickname for men like you, horderai, the barley men. You expected the diet of a warrior, meat, wine, the spoils of the hunt. Instead, you're being fattened up like a pig for market. But there's a scientific brutality to this menu. The Lanista doesn't want you lean. He wants you protected by a thick layer of subcutaneous fat. In the arena, a deep cut to the muscle ends the show too quickly, but a slice through a layer of fat, that bleeds. It looks horrific. It drives the crowd into a frenzy. And most importantly, it's a wound you can survive. You aren't being fed to be healthy. You're being fed to be a better visual effect. The post, Palus. Your first 6 months are spent fighting a wooden pole. You aren't given a steel blade. You're given a wooden rudis that weighs twice as much as a real sword. The Doctore. He is usually a retired champion who survived his term. If you drop your guard, he doesn't shout, he strikes. The goal is to turn your Gallic warrior instinct into a performance machine. The psychological shift. You lose your name. You are now the Gaul, or number 14. You live in a 4x4 meter cell. You share it with a man you might have to kill in 6 months. But your 6 months are up. The Lanista has just booked his first contract for the upcoming Saturnalia Dames. And he hasn't just picked your rank, he's picked your persona. And in Rome, your persona is your destiny. The light through the visor is narrow. Your breathing echoes inside the bronze. You've been assigned the armatura of a murmillo. You carry a heavy rectangular shield and a short gladius. Your opponent? A retiarius. A man with no armor, just a net and a trident. The first fight. It's not a chaotic brawl. It's choreographed suspense. You're taught to move slowly, to let the crowd see your face, to sell the danger. The economics of blood. At this rank, you finally get paid. Every time you step onto the sand and survive, you receive a manumissio, a fight fee. For a Palus rank, this is often more than a Roman legionary earns in 6 months. The survival rate. Contrary to the movies, only about 1 in 10 fights ends in death. You are an expensive asset. The lanista loses money if you die. The thumbs down is a business disaster. You survived. You've won 3 fights in a row. You're no longer a recruit, you're a working fighter. But as your rank rises, the lanista's protection fades, because the more the crowd loves you, the more they'll eventually want to see you bleed. You are now a Primus Palus, a first-rank champion. Your name is written in charcoal on the walls of the city. Women pay for vials of your sweat to mix into their facial creams. Elite aristocrats invite you to their dinners, not as a guest, but as a prize. But look at your scars. The surgeon, Galen. Because you are now worth thousands of gold coins, you get the best medical care in the world. The lanista hires Galen, the most famous doctor in history, to stitch your wounds. He uses silk thread and opium for the pain. You are being held together by the finest science 73 AD can offer. The paradox of fame. You are a superstar, but you are still infamous. Legally, you are in the same category as a prostitute or an actor. You cannot vote, you cannot hold office, and your testimony is worthless in court. You are the most famous nothing in Rome. The stakes. At this rank, you only fight other champions. The 1 in 10 death stat doesn't apply here. Every fight is a coin flip with death. You've reached the top. You've won 20 fights. Your purse is full of gold. And then the lanista enters your cell with a small wrapped object. It's the one thing you've been fighting for and the one thing that might destroy you. The rudis, the wooden sword of freedom. With this, your contract is void. You are no longer property. You can walk out of the Ludus Magnus, buy a small farm in the hills, and never look at a blade again. This is where most men stop. But then there's Flamma. Flamma was a Syrian soldier. He reached the rank of Primus Palus. He was offered the rudis, his freedom, and he took it. Then, a month later, he came back. He signed a new contract. He was offered freedom again. He refused. He did this 4 times. He fought 34 times. He won 21. He died at 30 years old, still a gladiator. Why stay? For men like Flamma, the civilian world offered nothing but poverty. In the Ludus, he was a god. Outside, he was a broken veteran with no trade. The brotherhood. Gladiators often paid for each other's funerals. They formed burial clubs. On their tombstones, they didn't list their families. They listed their rank and their wins. The Ludus was the only home they had. There is one final rank. If you save your gold and keep your wits, you buy the school. You become the lanista. You become Gaius. You sit in the shade of the box seats watching a new Gallic recruit sweep the blood off the sand. You know exactly what he's thinking. You know the weight of the chains. And tomorrow, you'll sell him for 15 gold coins. We call them slaves or monsters, but they were people who made a choice in a world that gave them none. Stefan Milo once said, "There's nothing more humanizing than knowing someone's name." Flamma, Tetrades, Priscus. They aren't just characters in a simulation. They were men who bled on the same sand you just walked. Next time you see a ruin, don't look at the stone. Look for the names carved into it, because 2,000 years later, that's all that's left of the climb.